Were the Burundian elections free and fair? And why has the third term become such a contentious issue? How has political volatility impacted the country's refugee crisis? And why is opposition calling for a negotiated government of national unity? What time is it? It's question time. Welcome to Question Time. My name is Mpho Sedu. Counting of votes continues in Burundi amid tensions sparked by President Pierre Nkurunziza's controversial decision to stand for a third consecutive term. Just under 3/4 of the country's 3.8 million eligible voters turned out for these votes or elections. These were reports of gunfire and explosions that claimed 2 lives. Burundi's leading opposition leader is reported to have called on President Nkurunziza to hold talks with political rivals. He says this could help avert a new conflict in the East African country. A reminder that this is a live program, and therefore you can call us and air your views. The number to dial if you are in South Africa, 089-110-4210, and if you are outside the borders, 00278911042110. Our Twitter handle is @QuestionTime24. My guest today, of course, Prof, welcome to the show, Professor Pooh, and Dr. Isaac Hom, who is a resident here at the SABC.
Thanks,
gentlemen, welcome to the show. What is the latest? Let me start with you. You are in the media space.
Well, the latest, they say that he's won the elections, but the final results will come out tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, so they claim that he's got something like about 70% of the vote, and that's it. And until now, we've not heard of any sort of problems with him. But there's a danger that these elections and what the situation will actually get worse, not in Burundi, but regionally.
Okay. Prof, were they free and fair?
We cannot even talk about free and fair. When you talk about these elections, as far as I'm concerned, so far, this is where an election that has reached the lowest level in terms of psephology. Psephology is the scientific study of elections,
yes,
whereby you want to make sure that an election is run transparently, and whereby there's no voter intimidation, there's no chicanery or fraudulent activities. The election is attended by observers with credibility. And so far, we haven't had, much of this.
Yes.
In fact, if anything, the opposite is the case, whereby we normally talk about an environment conducive to free and fair elections. Now, you couldn't talk about that in the case of Burundi, because so many people, as you mentioned in your intro, died, and so many refugees fled. As we are speaking, some are still fleeing, we understand, to neighboring countries, Tanzania
actually,
Rwanda, and so on.
Yes.
So, in short, you cannot talk about that phrase, free and fair elections, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of these elections, precisely because of that environment, that lack of environment which is free and fair, or conducive to free and fair elections.
But was the coach wrong to stand for the elections? I call him the coach because he loves his football, Hallelujah FC.
Well, the coach, in terms of the legal issues, elections also have to rely on the law, the constitution, as well as, the views of the parliament, as well as the politicians, the opposition in Burundi. They argue that he was wrong, to stand in for an election. Currently, as we talk about the implementation of the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, one of the specifications is that you cannot, as an incumbent or sitting head of state, simply ask Parliament or just come up with some means of changing the constitution simply because you want to extend your term of office. And
And
this has happened in Burundi.
Yeah, but we also cannot talk about Burundi and not talk about the Arusha Agreement.
Of course, the Arusha Agreement also comes into play because this was the idea of preventing, the president to have more than 2 terms in 2000 was precisely to avoid a situation whereby the tenuous, ceasefire that was achieved then would crumble. Okay. Precisely because of the disagreement between the Hutu, the Twa, as well as the Tutsi, ethnic groups, which had to balance the power in terms of ensuring that next time you might ensure that a different ethnic group is able to hold that office. Yes.
Yes, sir. Tactically, the coach is not wrong.
Well, you see, I mean to say that I heard the prof talking. Talking about the Arusha Agreement.
Yes.
And Arusha Agreement saying that it was to keep a ceasefire. People forget that when the Arusha talks were going, there was no ceasefire. Mm. Yeah, there was no ceasefire. And again, people are not aware there, and I keep on repeating this, that the Arusha talks, those are not all-inclusive talks. At the Arusha talks, the conveners and the mediators, which was President Nyerere, under pressure, they did not invite the warring factors, which were 2 warring factors, the CNDD, FDD, and also the NLF of Agaton.
Yeah.
Now, the thing was this, that there was the CNDD at the Arusha talks. Now, this man was just a CNDD, and he was Nyangoma. He was the founder of the CNDD. Mm. What the CNDD stands for is National Council for Defense of Democracy. Mm. Yeah, but then CNDD-FDD, it was CNDD-FDD, it was the National Council for Defense of Democracy and Forces for Defense of Democracy. Yeah. Those were people in the bush who were fighting. They were not wanted, they were not invited. So the talks went without the major players as far as the fighting was concerned, and there was no ceasefire. Yeah. So when the ceasefire took place and the things were put in place, fighting continued, and it took actually the intervention of President Zuma to actually bring these people in. And the first thing that they did was to sign a ceasefire. Mm. So those terms in saying that the Arusha conference was there to look for after a ceasefire, it was not on. And the funny thing is this, that we find that the coach, as you call him, Nkurunziza, to say that the whole thing about his 3rd term or 2nd term is contentious. Yeah, he took the thing to court. To say that the court adjudicated in his favor. People said the court was not free and fair. I'm not there to criticize that. But we could actually sort of look at other incidences where the same thing happened. But first, let's look at his argument. His argument is this, that on his 1st term in 2005, he was not elected. Yes. By the people. Yes. He was appointed by Parliament.
Which is correct.
Yes, which is correct. And again, you find that once that was there, they actually put the constitution together, which took all the tenets of the Arusha and put them in. And from there, it went to Parliament, it went to a referendum, and it was accepted. And as such, it became implementable. So they argue that you cannot implement something retrospectively. Whereas this thing here took place at a time when he was in power. Yeah? So that's why they count that 1st term of his was not an elected term. Yes. So they say that. That's his argument, that we should start counting from 2010. Yes. Yeah? The same thing happened in Senegal with Abdoulwade.
Abdoulwade, yes.
Yeah. When he actually changed the constitution. And when he changed the constitution, he finished his 5 years, he finished another 5 years, and then for the 2nd term, he wanted to go for elections. The opposition came up in the similar way that they did come up in Burundi. But the thing went to court, the constitutional court. He brought in a lawyer from France, and the court adjudicated in his favor that you cannot implement the law or a constitution retrospectively, despite what was agreed before then. But then now you find that why they lost the elections. The same thing happened to our friend, Goodluck Jonathan. Yes. Yeah. So now that was the argument. Yeah. Okay. So now you find that you've got to look at the whole case. And the East African community, they never declared his 3rd term bid as being illegal. When they sat in Dar es they said that give peace a time to settle in, and then you can hold the elections. Nobody has said from the East African community that you are not eligible to stand for the elections.
Hold the thought there. I want us to take a quick break, and a reminder that you can call us and air your views. The numbers to dial 089-110-4210. What do you think? Is President Nkurunziza right or wrong to stand for another term? Let's rather call it another term, for safety's sake. This is question time.
From humble beginnings, this selfless icon altered the history of the world, freed a country, and united a nation. He taught us humility and forgiveness. To the world, he is Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. But to us, he is simply Tata Madiba.
Which crime did the government commit in allowing the people to voice their opinions over who should lead their country in the next 5 years? Why then should we be facing sanctions? I think that even in this case, as it is in international relations generally, fairness and respect for each other, it should be the guidelines.
I don't recognize the results of those elections.
So you don't recognize the outcome?
No, I don't.
Of this election?
I don't. What I would like is that we go on in the negotiations, which began with the mediation of President of Uganda, Kaguta Yoweri Museveni.
Welcome back. This question time. You're watching my guest today, Professor Keleboga Mapunya, who is from the Department of Political Science at the University of South Africa, and Ntate Isaac Khomo is an SABC analyst. We're taking your calls on the numbers that will be on your screen right away. The numbers to dial 089-110-4210. Let's hear what you think about President Pierre Nkurunziza. Now, Prof, the gentleman, Ntibin Dunganya, says he does not recognize the elections. Is Burundi doomed?
Well, Burundi is not doomed if you recognize the fact that an election doesn't make democracy. Neither does an election make for, alone as it is, make for political stability. It's one of the ingredients. Some have argued that you can't, make do without them, but I would argue against that, in the sense that you need, elections, especially those elections that are run, like I've mentioned earlier, on the basis of, transparency, those which are credible, which can confer legitimacy. Okay. So to that extent, if he says he doesn't recognize, the elections, I would, be worried about that, because currently, in terms of the democratic trajectory in Africa, we are looking at the increasing reliance of African countries on the importance of elections to usher in democracy. For me, elections are like the midwife. And if the midwife is sick, then even the baby might be deformed, or for want of a better word, the baby might even die. So to that extent, for me, I think that we still have an important role for elections in Africa, but these elections must be run according to certain principles, which are based on international standards, even according to the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, which I keep referring to.
What if the opposition goes to the bush?
They've gone to the bush already. Today, Nkurunziza actually sort of made a statement for the first time where he accused Rwanda of actually harboring rebels who are actually being put together to fight him. That was the first time that he directly criticized Rwanda. Yeah, and Kagame.
Yes.
Yeah. So basically, they'd been going to the bush for quite some time. The general who actually attempted the army coup, he's in Rwanda.
Yeah, actually,
and then there are many things.
Have a very
in fact,
good
there's the thing has got a regional. It's got so the impact now is not basically about whether Nkurunziza is there as an elected leader or not. What we are looking at Channel Africa is what is happening in Rwanda. The Rwandese have sent troops to the border. There is talk in Uganda and Rwanda that they are going to send troops into DRC to go and fight the FDLR and ADC. Yeah, they're saying that the intervention force, the African intervention force of South Africa, Tanzania, and Malawi is not doing a proper job. So you find that now that the war drums are being sounded in East Africa. And that's the thing that people are scared of, you see.
1,000 people are crossing into Tanzania daily on foot now.
Well, 1,000 people are crossing daily on foot. I mean to say you should remember that with the 1960 and 1972 genocides of Hutus, what happened was this, that a lot of Burundians went into exile, and many of them went to exile in Tanzania. Now, these are people who have been there in Tanzania and who have got relatives who are still in Tanzania, and they are anticipating, said maybe there's going to be fighting, so these people are just going back to where they came from. These are the old refugees. And many Burundians, those Burundians were in refugee camps in Tanzania for over 40 years. They were in Bilankulu refugee camp around Mpanda. There was a huge camp. So basically, and around Tabora. So these people, basically, they are really going back, hoping that, I mean, sort of in anticipation that maybe there's going to be fighting.
Just hold the thought there. I want us to just have a look at the tweets at question time 24. What are the viewers saying there? If we could just have those. I'm sure they will be on the screen sometime soon. There we go. Domfuti Mofuka says if the citizens participated in those elections, then the outcome is their will. Well, I think that's quite correct. Olan Williams says it is very bad in this continent. It means that other people will never get a chance to lead their nation. I prefer Europe. I don't know why. Grant Eddie said absolute power corrupts. Absolutely correct. It starts with a third term, and if unchecked, ends with a Hitler. Prof. Nkurunziza is still young. If he were to leave office, what does he go home and do?
That's a big question. You know, in Africa, I think that is one of the challenges that we as a continent have not yet addressed. You know, to make provisions for heads of state who might still be strong, you know, as and when the third term or the term, you know, let's not call it any third or a second or whatever, as and when their term of office expires. And to be able to, you know, join that, what I normally call the golden league, you know, of statesmen, you know. For instance, the African Union has got this panel, African Union Panel of the Wise. Perhaps we could have a similar thing for the heads of state. In fact, I understand there are moves to this effect.
But the assumption that all of them are wise is wrong as well, Prof.
Well, of course, but the assumption is that they have got experience. You know, they've been in power, they've been there, they've done that. So I'm hoping that you know, there will still be a role for him, you know, in the continent. It's just that you know, in line with Jean-Francois Bayard's argument that in Africa we have the politics of the belly, you know, that people are thinking of lining their stomachs and so on. The issue of getting into power tends to become a life and death affair, such that people want to stay in power, and once they're in power, they want to stay there, you know, permanently. Okay. Yeah. So which becomes a challenge.
The African Union at home, they did not even send observers.
No, the African Union did not recognize the elections. They did not send observers. In fact, what the African Union requested was this, that the elections be postponed.
Yes.
And let give peace a chance to actually prevail, and then hold the elections. The African Union never said that you're not entitled to have a third term.
Yeah.
But again, coming back to the question of the third term, basically the third term issue, it's It's a constitutional issue. It does not have anything to do with democracy. So long as your country is democratically run, then you can have a third or fourth term. I mean, Wadi wanted a third term, the country was democratic, he was voted out. Jonathan wanted a third term. It does not mean to say that you want to become a dictator. But one thing, we should look at the Arusha Agreement and look at the 5 protocols which came out, the Mwanza protocols and others which came out there. There's a very good writer who wrote a book saying that who said that the Arusha Accord was doomed to fail because it never addressed the issues of democracy. It addressed the ethnic issues.
Yes.
And you find that in the accord itself, it's frightening, because with the accord, with what they agreed in Arusha, was this, that a president had to change the constitution. The parliament, you needed an 80% vote in parliament. They said that you need 4/5 of the parliamentarians had to vote for the change of the constitution. And again, you needed, I think, a 3/5 change agreement in the Senate. Again, there are other issues which say that since the Hutus are a majority and they make up 85% of the population, they say that 60% of seats in parliament have to be Hutu seats. They cannot have more than 60%. Therefore, even if the party which is affiliated to Hutus, they get about 80% vote, the parliamentarians there, they could not go more than 60%.
Okay.
Now, that is the Arusha Accord. Now, you find that there is a very big problem, but we'll come back to that.
Alrighty. Pascal, you are in Cape Town. Welcome.
Mpo, how are you?
I'm well, my brother.
Fantastic. I wanted to just get the thoughts of your panel in relation to why the regional leaders, including our own president here in South Africa, is very quiet about what is happening in Burundi, because we have not heard our leaders either refusing or condemning the fact that what is happening in Burundi is unconstitutional. So I think their quietness is very, very concerning.
Okay. Thanks. Let me start with you, Prof.
Well, off the cuff, my take is that we haven't had much from them because they are involved in behind the scenes, negotiations, talking to the people, talking to President Pierre Nkurunziza and talking to his government. And the other one is the fact that the African countries are used to ensuring that they normally don't embarrass their own, in public.
Yes.
So therefore, they would not be involved in megaphone diplomacy, whereby they stand on rooftops and shout to say that what you are doing is wrong. But behind the scenes, behind closed doors, I would be sure that they are engaging. They've been engaging the Burundian government and the people and the regime since the April announcement by President Nkurunziza that he wants to stand in for another term.
Museveni went there.
Museveni went there. In fact, the opposition did not want Museveni. Museveni had a 2-term thing, and he extended it to the 3rd, and he's going to go for a 4th term next year. And he's been ruling Uganda for the last, I think, 35 years or something like that.
Yeah.
Rwanda, then they are supporting the opposition in Burundi. But Rwanda, I mean to say, Kagame has extended his thing for a 3rd term and on and on. Yeah, he has got a parliament which votes for him, and nobody has said anything. You see, this is the hypocrisy of African leaders, and also of the media. Many people sort of do not contextualize the whole issue of Burundi, to actually look at even to listen to what Nkurunziza is saying. It's not that I'm supporting him, but he has got his arguments, which nobody's listening to. Yeah, the neighbors themselves, they are actually sort of, they've done so. Kabila tried to talk about extra 3rd term.
Yes.
I mean to say that the international media, the US aid, the America, they went and they condemned him. Yeah, and there were riots there. But nobody said anything about Rwanda. So you find that there's an element of hypocrisy within the African situation. And not only that, Nkurunziza, basically what they're trying to do, they're trying to change the constitution, not through force, to actually bring in more democracy. People do not understand that the Arusha talks basically, or even though they were mediated by Nyerere and our own President Mandela, many things in that thing are not conducive to a real democracy. Yeah, so that there are many issues which need to be changed and talked about. I think that's why this man, Nkurunziza, is trying to hang on so that he can actually iron out this situation. But people don't understand something. Nkurunziza is very popular in Burundi. The uprisings that you are seeing in Burundi, those are in Bujumbura. But if you go to the rural areas, he's looked upon as a god among the Hutus. In the last parliament, he had 76% of the seats there. Yeah. And people really believe in him. I mean to say that the party which actually sort of claimed that they were supporting the Hutus in the Arusha talks, it's nowhere to be seen. Yeah. Nkurunziza basically has got a very big rural backing, over 50, over 60%. That's why he's so arrogant.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for the insight and knowledge on this particular subject. It was question time for today. A big thank you to my guests and to you for watching the show. Our email address, questiontime@sabc.co.za. From me and the crew, have yourself a wonderful time. Goodbye.